Greetings, YouTube. Yesterday, the Gentleman Gamer Clack Click Bang did a video about suggestions for starting out characters in a role-playing game, how the group comes together, and how they function. So I thought I'd talk about some of the ways I've used these different ideas in the past. Now, the simplest way, of course, is to have a game where you've only got one player, and that's pretty easy to do. Of course, once you start getting multiple people involved, things get more complex. But my favorite one-player game was probably a Gamma World 4th Edition game, where I had the campaign start in Western Massachusetts amongst the group of people that had been members of a live-action, full immersion LARP. And these people had been living as ancient Celts full-time for years. I mean, like an entire generation or two had been raised in this little, lost world kind of thing. This is before the war. So when the war came around, these people had the skill set that they needed to make the segue into a barbarian culture all ready to go. I also had planned on, but never got to use, the fact that there were other full immersion cultures that had survived the war. I was going to have Klingons, and I think there was a number of others that I had based off of science fiction or fantasy or actual historical eras that had been better prepared to survive in a world where suddenly there was no technology. I've used a two-person game where the two main characters were a thief and was it Rogue under second edition or Thieves? I can't remember. But a thief and a fighter, and they had been together in a thieves guild, and they decided they didn't want in anymore. They didn't like the work. One of them wasn't evil. One was neutral, and they're like, okay, I've had it. We don't want this gig anymore. So they pulled up stakes and they left. So that's how they came together. I started a campaign where all of the people involved were members of the same patron's staff. It was a noblewoman, and she had brought these people together to do tasks for her. It was essentially Charlie's Angels, except they actually got to see and meet the woman in question. And besides doing adventuring gigs, one of the main characters' job was also to take care of all the parties they had. She had a party every month. So it was the player's job to handle coming up with a theme, making sure that there were guests. So I tried to bring in the social aspects as well as the adventuring aspects of the campaign. I've had a cyberpunk game where the members were cops. Bingo. You're cops. I think two of them lived together as well, roommates. So there you go. Good to go. What else have I used over the years? One of the best ones I think I used in a D&D campaign, it was 3.5, was a group of people wanted to all come together, but they all had very different kind of background ideas. So what I did is I had them be teenagers, and they were the survivors of an orc raid. And one of the members of the party was actually related to one of the NPCs. He was the nephew of one of the NPCs. And this uncle of his had taken all these refugees in because he had a large farm and he had the resources to handle it. Seeing as quite a few of his neighbors had been murdered or captured by these orcs, there were suddenly all these orphans. And so the town, or the village, divided these kids up as best they could so they had someplace to go. And he had gotten all the people that were in the members of the adventuring group that eventually became known as the Band of Blackcroft, if I remember correctly, the name of the group. And so that was the way to get individuals that were very different in class and in race. There were halfling, humans, and a dwarf all together in the same group. And it was, this is how you were raised. You were raised as essentially an extended family. And these are some of the methods I've used in the past. Of course, I don't even remember how I did this back in the first edition. It was probably something tacky like you meet in an inn, because back then that seemed to be the way to do things. You all met in an inn where you found yourself staring at a posting looking for adventurers. And hey, you want to adventure together kind of thing? There wasn't a lot of depth back then. Now I realize there are people who had depth in their first edition campaigns, but apparently the GMs I encountered and myself, we didn't have a lot of depth. People adventured together because the players themselves wanted to adventure together, and no one seemed to really pay all that much attention to why these characters would ever want to be together. They just were. So I'm interested in knowing, how have you started groups in your campaigns? Or do you have any original ideas? Have you thrown a twist on something I've suggested today? Or is there something that neither I or the gentleman has thought of? I'd be interested in knowing.